Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and since Fantasy Fest is just around the corner, details down below in case you want to join us, I decided that I was going to talk to you about the fantasy books that I have read this year. If you don't know this about me, I keep a super detailed spreadsheet of everything I read, specifically for moments like this where I can be like, so I have this cool spreadsheet, like me, and also let's talk about the fantasy that's on it. That's not the only reason. I really like charts. Anyway, at time of filming this, it looks like I've read about 140 books so far this year, and some of them are fantasy. I read kind of across all genres, but there's definitely some fantasy in here, so let's find it. My first read of the year was actually a fantasy book, A Local Habitation by Shauna McGuire. This is the second in the October Day series, and basically this series splits its time between the Fae world and our world. The main character is a private detective, so it's got that going for it, but she also obviously uses magic because she is half Fae, and this series is wonderful. Consider picking it up. This also reminds me that I want to continue this series because it's really good. The next fantasy book I read this year was The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin, and this one is the first in the Broken Earth trilogy. I have read the first two books. I'm holding off on the third book because then I know there's no more, and also the books are big and they take a lot of brain power, and I just want to know that I'm really ready to finish the series when I choose to do so. If you've never heard of this series before, it centers around people that have this type of magic where they can shift the earth, and these people are systematically rooted out and killed off, basically. Either that, or they're trained. You're either for the government or against it, basically. My next fantasy book is from February, and that's The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. This one might dip itself into the science fantasy realm because this one is about vampires. And it's been a while so I can't exactly remember, but I think they try to explain how vampirism came to be via, the regular scientific inherited way. But also that's not a real thing that happens in our real world that we know of. So I just basically paint anything with vampirism as fantasy. Basically, if you were bit by a vampire in this world, you were meant to turn yourself over to these places called cold towns, which are where all the vampires live. And it's all about a girl waking up after a party where everyone has died but her. My next fantasy read this year was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This one is about a circus, as you might have guessed, that only takes place at night. Yes, understanding. And what is something that every circus needs? Obviously a little bit of magic. This one is about two families dueling, basically to see who can create the protege who has the most impressive magic. And for a long time, the people that are in this competition don't even realize that that's what's going on. This book also started out as a NaNoWriMo project, which makes me like it that much more, and the audiobook is done by one of the people that's done the Harry Potter audiobooks. So somehow that made it even more magical because he has a very magical voice. He being Jim Dale. I checked my spreadsheet to figure out who it was. My next fantasy read this year was in March, and that was Beneath the Sugar Sky, again by Shauna McGuire. This is a different series though. This is the third in the Wayward Children series, which starts with Every Heart a Doorway. And what's interesting about this series is every book takes place in a different fantastical land. The one that we go to in this one is very nonsensical. But because every book follows different characters that have been exiled from their fantasy worlds, it allows the series to go in very different directions depending on the book. Children. I mean, if there was going to be nonsensical yelling, it might as well have been while I was talking about that book. Apparently I started out April with 3 fantasy reads back to back to back, so that's cool. The first one was The Wicked and the Divine Imperial Phase Part 2, which I think is the 6th volume in that series. So instead of telling you about it, I'll tell you about the beginning of the series. The Wicked and the Divine is about a group of gods that get reincarnated about every 80 years. And basically they become the pop stars of their time with fame and riches, but they will die within the next 2 years. My next fantasy was Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett, which is part of the Discworld series, as well as the Witches series, which is within the Discworld series. It's a whole big world. This one was fun because it had a ton of Shakespeare references, and Pratchett just played around with how ridiculous some Shakespeare shows are, and the weird theater tropes, and theater in general. It was just really fun to read if you like theater or you know anything about Shakespeare. My next fantasy read was Reign of the Fallen by Sarah Glenn Marsh, and this one is about necromancers. Like, I honestly just want to leave my description at that. It's about necromancers, and also the main character is bi, so yes. Speaking of queer fantasy, the next one I read was Heart of Iron by Ashley Poston. This is another one of those books that I would classify as science fantasy because it definitely has sci-fi vibes, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a while ago, there is a little bit of magic involved. This one has to do with Outlaw Anna and her sentient android, as well as the rest of the outlaws she lives with. She's trying to pull off a heist when somebody else gets in her way, so now she obviously has to take him down. This book went in directions I did not see coming, and I was very excited about it. The next fantasy book I read was The Apocalypse of Elena Mendoza by Sean David Hutchinson, and this book was so sarcastic and snarky and had such a cool premise. Elena Mendoza was the product of a virgin birth, and for as long as she can remember, she's had inanimate objects talking to her. Events start the apocalypse and she has to make some very tough decisions. The next fantasy book I read was An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. This one is the part of a trilogy. The third book just recently came out. And this one is a dystopian with a very rich backstory. We have dual perspectives and you get to know them very, very well and see their strengths and weaknesses. In May I read A Darker Shade of Magic, which is the first in a trilogy by V.E. Schwab. This one has to do with alternate worlds and a very select few amount of people that can actually make their way between those worlds. So they travel between different worlds that all happen to have a city called London, which is not the same in every world. The magic system in this book, like many of the other ones I've mentioned, is very intriguing. In June I read The Spellbook of the Lost and Found by Moira Fowley Doyle. This one is about a group of girls whose diaries go missing and they find a spell book and cast a spell to get them back. This one is set in Ireland and initially I was very excited about that, but it felt like it was written in a small town in America. However, I have a feeling that has to do with the North American publishers scrubbing the language. For example, there was a point where one of the characters was looking for aspirin, and if this was in Ireland, they'd be looking for paracetamol. Same deal with talking about things like torches and flashlights. Either way, this one has some interesting twists and has a queer element to it. Speaking of queer elements, the next fantasy I read was Lizard Radio by Pat Schmatt. This one has to do with a character that, in our world, we would call them non-binary. In their world, that's just not a thing that's allowed to happen. Basically, by the time that people are 10, they have to pick which gender they're going to be and conform to it. This one is a dystopian, it's got some mystical elements to it, and I don't really want to say much more because it would ruin it. My next fantasy was Midnighter and Apollo, which is a comic book about two men that are in love, and they're also superheroes or whatever. The next fantasy I read was Pantomime, which is like the Night Circus, but hella queer. Instead of the circus acts being focused on magic, there's magic in this world, and the main character is intersex. Oh, that was also the month that my book club made me read this book that you might have heard of. It's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know, this book is just never on the recommendation list when people talk about fantasy. In July, I read Undead Girl Gang by Lily Anderson. This one is about a girl whose best friend has recently died, and since they both practice magic, she decides to do some magic to try to figure out why her best friend is dead, because nobody believes her that she wouldn't have just committed suicide. And instead of bringing her answers, the magic brings her dead people. Last month, I also read Weave a Circle Round by Carrie Marin. This one seemed like it was going to be contemporary until it definitely shifted into, yes, these characters are magical. This book is about three step-siblings who have some weird people move into the house next door. And honestly, just telling you anything about the kind of magic that's in this book would definitely wreck it. It is so fascinating. My next fantasy read was The Truth is a Cave in the Black Mountains by Neil Gaiman. This one is a very short story. I recommend the audiobook if that's something you have access to, because the audiobook also includes original music which backs the mood of the different scenes of the book. It's only about an hour long. It's very short. The final fantasy book that I've completed so far this year is Elena the First Adventure by Tamora Pierce. This is the first in a quartet and part of a very big universe of fantasy books. This book centers around Elena and her twin Tom. They're told that she is to go off to become a lady and he's to go off to become a knight. Neither one of them is cool with this plan. Since girls are taught to be ladies in the same place that people are taught magic, Tom and Elena switch places so Tom can go off to learn magic and Elena can go off to become a knight. So yes, Elena is a badass and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. So there you have it, those are the fantasy books I've read this year. Have you read any of these? Let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!